The race for the White House started last year, as most campaigns do. Highly bankrolled frontrunners, middling candidates hoping to catch fire, a few outsiders and oddballs given no chance for being there at the end. But in the year of the angry voter, the script was torn to shreds. Presumed titans struggled for traction, and a reality star and a self-described socialist registered in ways that jolted conventional wisdom. A series of GOP debates left watchers with mouths agape.
Don't worry about it, little Margo.
But as the Super Tuesday dust clears, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton threaten to run away with the nominations as Michigan gets its say. Which way will the mitten point? Tonight, it's the Michigan primary on a primetime edition of Flashpoint. Hi, and welcome to our live primetime edition of Flashpoint. Good to have you with us tonight. What we have seen this election cycle is really like nothing we've seen in our lifetime. An electorate that has not just got frustration built up in it, but in some cases a burn it down mentality. Candidates are either not progressive enough on the Democratic side or not conservative enough on the GOP side, according to base voters. Our Mara McDonald has a look back at the year of the angry voter.
Devin, never has money ever been a hindrance in any election cycle until this go-round. Jeb Bush raised more than $150 million and went precisely nowhere.
Time magazine last week did an incredible cover story. They said it's a movement, and that's what it is.
Forget about common wisdom. This year, it simply doesn't apply. The rise of Donald Trump, initially laughed off by everybody in the Republican establishment, well, it's not so funny anymore. Trump has tapped into a deep vein of anger with GOP voters.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters.
But it isn't just Trump.
Cruz, Sanders, and Trump they're deriving their support from people who are fed up with the political system. And that anger manifests itself in many ways, but anger is the root cause of their success.
It's easy to see, too, using Michigan as a microcosm of what's happening nationally. Day after day, you see swords drawn on social media by both parties with demeaning, nasty back and forth. And I'm not talking between each other, but inner civil wars in both parties.
If he is not the nominee, would you still come out and turn out for Hillary?
I will do what Bernie tells me to do. I won't like it, but if Bernie says, you know, stand behind her, I'll stand behind her.
Sanders voters slamming Clinton as a tool of the machine. Trump and Cruz voters snarling about how none of the other candidates are actual conservatives. Now, at this hour, the delegate math is on Clinton's side, but still, the infighting persists. Meanwhile, Trump continues to sail by Cruz and the others, despite sustained attacks. A GOP super PAC is now, at this late hour, going to try and take out Trump, and has been upfront about it. Will it stick to the so far Teflon Don? Don't bet on it. Nothing has so far. So who will be the last two standing on the 2016 version of Political Survivor?
I believe at the end of the day, the two nominees will be Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
A really interesting tidbit that was buried in our extensive election polling showed that when it came to GOP primary voters, the last thing they cared about when they were asked about a list of things was electability in November. It placed at a dismal 5.5%. Devin, back to you.
All right, Mara, we'll talk with our pollster about that finding a little bit later on. But joining me now, two congressional representatives from Michigan, Republican representative from the 10th District, Candace Miller is with us, and Democratic representative from the 12th District, Debbie Dingell. Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you.
Congressman Miller, let me start with you because you were there last night over at the Fox Theater for a pretty raucous scene. Try to describe your day after take on what we're watching.
It was a cage fight. I don't know how else to describe it. It was really unbelievable, and it just started off that way. And, you know, there were a number of dynamics that were making it really raucous. One, I think, actually is the commentators who have become their own political brand, if you will. They're celebrities in their own right, and they want their own brand, and they want to be able to have an impact themselves, their own personalities, on these debates. And so they bait all the candidates, and making sure that Donald Trump is baited, you know, a lot, and that he's got a lot of time to respond. And so it's all circling around him, and then they don't control the clock. They just let them all go at it. Of course, the ratings are going up, but it's sort of like a reality show
also have
here.
everybody talking over everybody else and interrupting.
Yes.
Yeah, it was quite a scene. Congresswoman Dingell, your take on it. Did you find it depressing last night or entertaining? Or both?
I don't know what I thought. I mean, first of all, I think we were watching reality TV, and what was really frightening me was the fact that reality was playing out in North Korea when we find out that they've told the nuclear weapons to be ready to launch at any minute. And I think
Took an hour 15 for that question to come up. Yeah.
Well, that's how I learned about it, because I had been on an airplane and been running around to meetings. So that got my attention, and I think it's a reminder to all of us about there are very serious issues. Look, when I saw Donald Trump last August, I thought he was refreshing. I found that people, you know, what he said, people thought he was speaking the truth and not speaking in gobbledygook. I do think people are angry. I think they're tired of politicians talking and not saying what they think or trying to interpret it. But I'm now scared. And when in the first 5 minutes we talk about the male anatomy and we don't talk about foreign affairs until the point at which we did last night, that gets your attention.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not scared. I have to say that. I'm not scared. The country is going to survive no matter what happens here. And I would say this. I think Trump has actually caught something that no one else really felt. And, you know, when we talk about people, whether they're angry or they're frustrated or whatever, this guy has really tapped into a vein. I mean, there were some interesting things on Super Tuesday. When you have the Secretary of State of Massachusetts saying that 20,000 people changed their voter registration from Democrat and Independent to go vote on the Republican side, they're going for Trump. And I, of course, come from Macomb County, the home of the Reagan Democrats.
Right.
And I've been talking to some Democratic elected officials there who said, doesn't this feel like the Reagan time in 1980? It's unbelievable. I'll tell you, and I think with Hillary, I think she will be the Democratic nominee. She's going to have a problem here in Michigan, because if you're a UAW person or whatever, you're not voting for Hillary Clinton. You're probably voting for Trump. When he talks about currency manipulation and these trade issues, that is
Jobs
red
headed to
meat.
Mexico. He was blasting on that today.
For all the manufacturing jobs we've lost, absolutely.
Are you, though, among the Republicans, because we're sensing some panic? Isn't that what we saw in Mitt Romney earlier yesterday? Some of the Republican leadership that's trying to figure a way around the rules here, to find a way to find somebody other than Trump. Are you among the panickers? You don't sound panicked.
No, I'm not panicked. In fact, I'm not even.
Can you support Donald Trump as the candidate?
I will support the nominee. And you know why? Because I trust the American people, and in this case, I trust the Republican voters to pick our party's nominee, and I will support whoever that nominee is. I absolutely will. Listen, there's no way I want Hillary Clinton to be the President of the United States. So
as they went through
Trump,
the litany of things, though, that Donald Trump has said, that we have pointed out many times that we're kind of in a post-truth atmosphere right now. When we say and prove that the things that Donald Trump has said aren't true, you can't carpet bomb the entire nation of Syria. That kind of thing doesn't move you off of him?
Well, you know, I was a Carly Fiorina supporter, and of course now she's out. But yes, I sort of think, this is my own observation, I sort of think it's coming down to a two-person race right now. And I think it's really on our side.
On your side.
I think it's Cruz and I think it's Trump. And I will tell you, the first and foremost thing always for me, the marquee issue is always national security and protecting the homeland. And every time Ted Cruz has had an opportunity to vote to hollow out the military, he has done so. So I'm sorry. I don't care what he says about a strong military. His actions have never been in that vein at all.
Congresswoman Dingell, to your side, and while I think a lot of people are getting to the point where they're presuming that it's going to be Hillary Clinton, we got a lot of weird things going on behind the scenes. The guy who set up her email server, given immunity this past week. It's hard to figure out where that's all headed. But she's got her own problems, I guess, ahead right now, doesn't she?
Well, first of all, I want to agree with Candace that this country will survive. We've got the democracy is the greatest form of government, and we are lucky that we live in a country where we can have the kind of dialogue that we've been having and sit here and laugh about it, I guess, to some extent. So I can express my concern about what the priorities are, but we will survive, and we'll all work together, because who's ever our president, they're our president, and that's something we always have to remember. With regard to Hillary Clinton, this is what I feel. First of all, I know her, and I do not think that she would ever deliberately lie, etc. What she did on her server, she had cleared with other people at the time and thought that it was right. She has offered to go meet with the FBI, offered to do it last fall. The New York Times reported last week that this should be coming to close in the next 6 weeks. Let's hope that it does, because right now everybody loves to rumor monger, speculate, and I think we really need to talk about the issues and not her email.
I'm curious as to whether how you both feel, though, about this talk about the unknown candidate slipping in. Somebody like Michael Bloomberg, somebody like Joe Biden, the Republicans trying to find somebody else to slide in at the last moment. Is any of that likely to, or is this just great
I mean,
chatter?
my understanding is that Michael Bloomberg's taken a very serious look at it and knows it would be almost impossible for him to win. I shouldn't speculate about the Republican Party.
I don't think there will be anybody on the Republican side. No, I think anybody coming in late now would have to come in on the Democratic side if Hillary gets indicted.
Are we headed toward an open convention? We're not really using the word brokered, I guess, anymore, but an open convention?
You know, Reince Priebus, who's the Republican National Committee chair, came out on the stage of the Fox last night and made it very, very clear that the party is not looking to do that kind of a thing. That would be a disaster for the Republican Party if they tried to steal the nomination away from somebody who actually you know, had the popular vote. That's the way it is. And, you know, really, as far as the elected officials, I don't think there's much of that, so much that it's really trying to change some of the stuff with Trump. It's more from Wall Street, I think. I think that's what's happening when they talk about the establishment. You look at all this money and everything that now they're going to go against him, and that's fine, whatever they want to do. It didn't work for Jeb Bush. I don't know how it will work here. But, you know,
It's interesting to think about he and Bernie Sanders both singing out of the same part of the songbook on that front. I'm curious, I want to let you both weigh in quickly. We're about to out of time for the segment, though, about what should happen with the Supreme Court vacancy.
Well, I mean, it's very clear what the Constitution says. The president should be nominating, and the Senate should be considering. To me, it's no question. That is his constitutional responsibility and the responsibility of the Senate to vote on it.
Congresswoman Miller.
Well, I think the president will nominate someone. I doubt that he'll get a hearing on it, and I think we should wait until the next president is elected.
It's a long time to wait, isn't it?
Not when you think about what's at stake. Not when you think about what's at stake here. It's a pivotal thing. It will be one of the most important, if not the most important issue in the election.
Great to have you both here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Can we make one comment that we both agree on? More people are involved in this election cycle than we've seen in a long time, and democracy is better when people engage.
We have been
breaking records,
asking for engaged voters, and we certainly seem to have that. Thank you both very much for being here. I want to quickly point out we invited all of the candidates to one-on-one interviews with Local 4 tonight. You're going to hear a few comments from those who took us up on that. You can find the extended versions of the interviews on the Flashpoint page at clickondetroit.com. Rhonda Walker spoke with Governor Kasich just this morning, and he described the atmosphere that he's been sensing at his town hall meetings.
People will talk about the most amazing personal things because some are very lonely and don't feel as though they have a voice. And for some reason, they feel safe when they talk to me, which is a real blessing. And they're willing to say some things that really is deep inside of them. What an unbelievable opportunity for me. And they have a sense that maybe I can help them.
How do you think it's going to go?
It's going to be really classy.
It's going to be really fantastic. It's going to be huge.
Well, is that a flattering portrayal of Donald Trump, or is all PR good PR? Let's take a look at the public relations side of this with our Guy Gordon.
Madison Avenue insiders say Donald Trump's message is strong, confident, and consistently inconsistent. He was a known quantity when he entered, and he hasn't deviated from the shoot-from-the-lip image he crafted over a decade. His unapologetic attacks against rivals, fueled by Twitter, go viral. Public relations firm Golan surveyed Republicans who say their ideal president is, quote, honest, reliable, and most suited to representing America's interests. But only 37% describe Donald Trump that way. Golan finds he leads because voters believe this outsider is the only GOP candidate who can deliver change. This is also the campaign of big data. All major campaigns now have a chief of analytics, someone to mine the gold nuggets of data, identifying how they can differentiate their candidate from others, and then connect with voters who find that difference motivational. Consider only 35% of Americans had a smartphone when campaign 2012 began. That's now close to 65%. Who we like on Facebook, who we retweet, sites we visit becomes important information that campaigns will use to reach us better. 61% of millennials get most of their political news from Facebook. 74-year-old Bernie Sanders has leveraged that to become the favorite of millennials less than half his age. His news blog, Democracy Daily, feeds a steady stream of pro-Sanders news content from independent sources. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton turned to Coca-Cola's brand chief to re-energize her image after 25 years in public life. While offering a snappy logo and a fresher, warmer look in TV ads, there are missteps, like her recent attempt to reach out to the youth by advertising on AOL.
I cannot wait to see how they appeal to the youth next. Maybe hand out some leaflets at bingo night or team up with Netflix to sponsor a Murder, She Wrote reunion.
The Cruz campaign gave Bloomberg News the best illustration yet of a campaign's big data dive. He tested hyper-local issues with Facebook ads in Iowa to see which ones resonated. Should traffic cameras be outlawed? Should fireworks be legalized? He then took a stand on these obscure issues that got traction in a way to separate himself from the GOP field, a strategy the Cruz campaign credits with his Iowa caucus win. PR experts warn, though, that level of micro-detail can leave a candidate looking like an opportunist.
That's our Guy Gordon with, I think, a terrific take on where things stand so far. Let's talk about that part of the election with my PR pros. Dennis Darnoy is here, Republican strategist with Rev6 Data Systems. Toby Barlow is the Global Chief Creative Officer for Team Detroit. And Jill Alpern, Democratic strategist with Dewey Square Group. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you.
Jill, let me start with you. Sure. I think that as we start talking about social media, that's where we're really flipped into completely new territory. And maybe that's part of why all of us can only say, gosh, I've never seen anything like it. Well, it's the first election that we've had like it.
Right. Well, I think that the presidential campaign is now a platform. It is not a one-way conversation. It is a two-way conversation between a candidate and his or her supporters and supporters among one another. And now people can not only engage in multiple ways and more quickly, but they're creating their own content, or they're taking content that is specialized for them, grab, go, and moving it along. So things are really radically changing.
Yeah, it really is extraordinary. Toby, you and I have talked about branding. You know as much about branding, I think, as anybody in the world, and the importance of creating a brand. And that's why, to me, it's funny when we say that Donald Trump has spent almost no money compared to everybody else. In many ways, he has spent tons of money for years building a brand.
And he's always built his story on being a disruptor, you know, and standing out. And I think that kind of marries to the zeitgeist right now, where people are really hungry for disruption. They see gridlock and they want someone to just break through. So it almost doesn't matter what he says. That emotional content of disruption is so powerful.
How do you run against it then?
I don't know. I mean,
in fact, even in the Republican power halls, they're trying to figure out what to do with their Frankenstein.
The facts don't seem to matter, you know. So I mean, they keep on kind of coming at it from different directions, but in a way, it only serves his interest. It says he's the center and he is the power.
Dennis, your thoughts on what we're watching with this Trump phenomenon?
I think it's true, and there is no unifying strategy to negate Trump. And if you watch the debates last night, the most curious thing is they spent an hour and a half beating up on him, and in the last minute they all agreed to support him if he was the nominee, which undercuts the very argument of never Trump.
Yes, yeah. So where do you expect the party is headed here? There's all kinds of talk about chicanery behind the scenes about what they can do sort of with the rules. But what do they do about the public relations of this? How do they turn the story if that's what they need to do?
Well, it will be very interesting. I mean, most people right now are expecting that it is going to be a contested convention and not a, we don't call it a brokered convention. There is going to be negotiation. And if Donald Trump is
He stole my heart.
Yeah, if Donald Trump is the master negotiator, we're going to be in for a treat come Cleveland. But he right now is the only one on track to get the number of delegates to succeed outright. No other candidate can do that. So I think you are going to see a concerted effort to derail that, get it to a convention, and then let the negotiations begin.
This coarsening of the discourse, where we won't go back into the hands and the anatomy lesson we got last night. But Jill, in many ways, while some of us really like the idea of politicians being high-minded, and we love the quotes that are in marble all over Washington, this is the way people talk today. This is the way, and in many ways, he's broken through that marble to talk to people the way they talk on Twitter, the way they talk on Snapchat. This is hitting them where they live their lives.
Yeah, it sure is, and we're all talking about it, so it's working on steroids, right? But again, I think that we have to remember who's voting in these contests. So you're looking at hard right Republican voters who were with the Tea Party, right? Couldn't succeed, and they've now found their champion. And so this is, venom is fueling and propelling him in these low turnout contests. I'm not convinced when we get to the general election, if people won't still want that kind of reality TV, interesting give and go, because folks are so angry, and Bernie Sanders is channeling some anger as well around activism. But you have to turn activism into support. He's not doing as well, I think, as people thought he would do, because they don't believe there'll be a revolution. They want someone to go to Washington who can actually get this job done, and people see that as getting Republicans and Democrats to work together.
It's a fair point, Toby. People often say that really elections are two different elections. The primary election is its own animal, and then the general election is something completely different. But does the PR approach of it change, or is it the same thing?
Well, you have to go back to the Mitt Romney Etch-a-Sketch line. I mean, you can't actually just kind of clean the slate and start over anymore, because with that constant media, with that constant social presence, you're kind of getting the public very, very active, and to think about something like a brokered convention, you're going to be, really infuriating lots of supporters, and that's going to really kind of lead to all sorts of troubles in November. So it's a really fine line to walk, I think.
That's true. In an age of social media, everything stays out there in the public realm. There used to be the argument, the Nixon argument, run as far to the right as you can in the primary and come back to the center in the general, but that was predicated on people not remembering what you said 2-3 months ago, maybe in a private meeting in Alabama. Now, everything you say is out there to be reused against you.
Which is what I've tried to convince my kids. I've said that the half-life of an internet isotope is forever. It never goes away. However, it doesn't seem to matter, as I think it was Toby mentioned earlier, we're in a post-truth world. It doesn't seem to matter what Donald Trump says. He doesn't seem to pay for what I guess for other people would be a misstatement or a gaffe.
But I think people a lot now in politics, they've made up their mind. Do they like him? Do they not like him? Is he going to, in their minds, change Washington? Once they've decided, yes, he is the candidate to change Washington, no matter what Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, or Mitt Romney says, their minds are made up. And so, what we saw last night was really one pregnancy test and a few broken chairs away from a full Springer. And I don't know that that necessarily is where we want the democracy to go.
I love it. Well, how much has the media made it's funny to watch the hand-wringing right now going on among a lot of people in the media, Jill, and I wondered at what point this crosses over into elitism. Somebody is voting for Donald Trump. The powers that be in the Republican Party need to be mindful of that as well.
Absolutely, but again, I mean, you're looking at the activists. They're talking to the activists, and the activists are fueling and propelling the conversation. A lot of people, though, in both parties are maybe not as hardened, or in the country, I should say, are, they're going to start 47% for the Dems, 47% for the Republicans. There will be 8 to 13 million people who are going to determine the outcome of this election.
As they always do.
In a persuasion context, right? So I think that you have to understand that there is anger and take it seriously, right? Because those are also the people who are going to be the backbone of a lot of the convincing, if properly channeled. And if the discourse, if you will, can be received by the rest of the folks who have to make up their mind. This is now, it's 3D chess. This is no longer, this is not, is not checkers. It is not simple moves. We're going to move out of the primary to the general election. So I think there is, for sure, railing against elitism and a tone-deafness, if you will, in many institutions. We see that in polling, whether it's, they hate bankers, they hate government, they're frustrated with or don't trust the media, no offense. And that's what Donald Trump is building this candidacy off. But at the end of the day, the universe that's going to make the decision about the outcome, they've got a little bit more common sense about people, again, needing to work together to solve these problems.
But there's some scary precedent, or maybe not scary, but there's some interesting precedents. I have to believe that Trump looked at Jesse Ventura and looked at Arnold Schwarzenegger and said, I can do that. I'm bigger than they are.
Sure.
In his mind, he's bigger than everybody. So, they made
in a lot of ways, apparently. Sorry. I told myself I wasn't going to go that direction.
But they made it through their primaries and disrupted and then went on to win the general election.
Yeah.
So there are precedents that I'm sure he's guided by.
Lastly, Dennis, we do have a lot of young people engaged right now because social media is so important. But over the years, we've realized that young people say one thing and then they don't necessarily turn out to vote. We saw it a little bit different with Howard, started to turn with Howard Dean, then Barack Obama. Is that changing? Are young people moved to the point where they get out and do something about their thoughts?
I think so. They're more engaged, and it started back in 2008 with the Obama presidency when he engaged youth voters. And just from that point on, people have realized that they are an important part of the electorate. And so because they are more engaged, because they're more willing to, go campaign, go knock on doors, they are becoming a very integral part of the conversation.
We'll see if they show up. All right. Thanks, gang, for the conversation. Really appreciate it. There's a lot more to come on this primetime edition of Flashpoint. As we head to break, the thoughts of Bernie Sanders. He talked with our Mara McDonald about trying to court city voters in Detroit, meaning the African-American vote. We'll be right back.
Our position on criminal justice is the strongest of any candidate. We got to end the obscenity of the United States having more people in jail than any other country on earth, largely African-American and Latino. Number two, we need an economic policy in this country that speaks to the needs of working families and not just billionaires.
Are you writing all this down?
Hold on. Let me grab my pen.
Has this been just beautiful fodder for all the late-night comedians or what? They never want this campaign to end. By the way, keep the conversation going on Twitter right now. Our handle on Twitter is FlashpointOn4. A lot of good comments coming in tonight. Joining me now, our next part of our conversation, columnist from the Detroit Free Press, Brian Dickerson, is here. President McConnell Communications, Darcy McConnell, is back with us. President and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Barua, is here. And the editorial page director of the Detroit News, Nolan Finley. Nolan, let me start with you. Have you reached the panic point yet over what's happening on the Republican side?
Well, it certainly is the most unpredictable and unusual election season I've ever seen. 6 months ago, we sat right here and I said, oh, Donald Trump will never be the nominee. And
yet I've invited you back anyway.
Yeah, I've been wrong. I have been wrong every step of the way of this. But I got to tell you, it looks fairly inevitable right now, except for the fact that in Michigan, if you look at our last poll a couple of weeks ago, the undecided vote was so very high in that poll. Donald Trump supporters were very strong for Donald Trump, but he was only at 25%. And now you've had, over the last few days, this huge spending campaign by the Republican establishment, if you will, to tear down their own front runner, which is an extraordinary thing to think about. But anyway, this huge spending campaign has been going on. It'll be interesting to me to see how that plays out Tuesday, because if it doesn't work here, if it doesn't show results on Tuesday, I don't know where it's going to work.
Yeah. Sandy, we had the issue a couple of years ago in the governor's race here where it felt like there was a lot of candidates who all were sort of representing the same little piece of turf, and that's how Governor Snyder ran off. I think for a while that's the way it was in the Republican race now, but not now. Now the four candidates that are left are all in very different islands, and yet it still seems to be benefiting Donald Trump.
Well, there's a little bit of a lap over between Kasich and Rubio. I mean, there's kind of an establishment wing there. And there's actually a crossover between the Cruz and Trump voter as well, too.
Yes.
So
the Venn diagrams, we've got some slivers, that's true.
But, I mean, unlike Nolan, I am actually in free form pants on fire panic. I mean, of course, I'm the guy. I'm the one.
He's just being restrained right now. I'm like, where is the Nolan?
I'm the one guy who still has a Bush sticker on my car. So I mean, I'm still hoping, right?
We can get you a razor blade
and fish, by the way, on his car.
So what's going to happen?
No, Nolan's exactly right. I don't see any scenario where Donald Trump doesn't get the nomination. He may not get to 1237, that's the magic number, but he, and I mean, it's a shoot the moon process to have Donald Trump walk in with not 1237, have a first ballot. After the first ballot, everyone's released, and then what happens? I mean, are they going to coalesce behind Marco Rubio or John Kasich or Ted Cruz? I think not. I think it's more likely that just enough people go over on the Trump side.
Interesting. Darcy, we had, through a lot of this stretch, it felt like a lot of Democrats sort of enjoying Trump's popularity. And then this past week on Bill Maher's show on HBO, he said, this isn't funny to me anymore. This is starting to get serious.
It's clearly not funny to either side in terms of the potential presidency of a Donald Trump. But the flip side is I thought Stephen Henderson wrote a pretty poignant piece that talked about the foundation that has been laid by the GOP to get to this point. You know, opposing the president for all of that time, you know, taking a tone that was not welcoming to everyone, and so on and so forth. So there is a bit of, if there is any being smug, it's about chickens coming home to roost.
Yeah. Brian, but in the last segment there, I made the point that there's a danger of getting close to what I guess some would say is elitism over, oh gosh, how can this guy be as popular? Somebody's voting for him. It's tough to find prominent voices who will take up for Donald Trump, but he is, if you saw his rally earlier today in Warren, he's reaching a lot of people and hitting a lot of the right notes for them.
I still think that as a general election phenomenon, he's not that scary. I wrote a few weeks ago that Kasich was the only general election opponent the Democrats were afraid of. Yeah. But I'd revise that a little bit. I think they're plenty afraid of Donald Trump, but in the way that the United States is afraid of Kim Jong-un. He's so erratic. He's so unpredictable. You don't know what he's going to do, and he's got a real gift for throwing people off their game. What if he's in a debate with Hillary Clinton and he lobs the worst bathroom wall insult you can think of at Hillary Clinton? How is she going to respond to that? Yeah, yeah. I mean, we haven't seen this kind of in-your-face tactic before, especially in a general election.
Devin, I was going to say, you know, Brian is either completely right or potentially completely wrong. So if you look at it in one, well,
you've really summed it up.
Yeah, I have. Listen, I'm covering my bases. But here's why I say that. So Donald Trump has received 3 million votes so far. Okay, in a country of 340 some odd million people, that's just a pittance, right? But the thing that, you know, gets my attention is when you look at the turnout. In 2008, the last time we had an open presidency, we had, at this point in the primary season, 5.5 million Republicans vote and 8.5 million Democrats vote. Barack Obama had energized a group of people that had not been involved in the political process yet. Right. Those numbers are now completely reversed. It's 8.5 million on the Republican side. And people are coming out, and people like who went to the Warren event are out there voting for Trump. And it scares me because I'm not a Trump guy at all. But he is definitely tapped into a vein.
But it's not just angry white voters who are going to be energized by a Trump candidacy. And plenty of Democratic voters, anybody but Trump voters, are going to be energized.
Yeah, there's some
by
of that,
his
Brian.
candidacy
But let's not pretend that there's not a lot of Reagan Democrats in that Trump coalition, and a lot of independents, particularly. These turnouts, I mean, 25% of the people who are coming out to the Republican primaries are not traditional Republican voters. I think you have to take a look at Trump's ability to energize people to the polls and weigh it against the people who just won't vote for him under any circumstances, or will come out to vote against him, and then take a look at the lack of enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Yeah, but you got to think about the blocks that do come out. The seniors.
I just think you can't sit here today and make an informed prediction.
But Latino vote, he's certainly inspiring them to come out against him.
Maybe he will on election day, or maybe he won't.
We're in vogue again. There is a concerted effort earlier than I've ever seen in terms of getting out to black.
But Darcy, people will always be more motivated to come out to vote for than they will against.
And Darcy, doesn't the trouble that Hillary has had, and it seems now that she's sort of more clear of Bernie Sanders than she was, but that she would be having trouble, I've made this point a couple of times before, that if she would be having trouble with a cantankerous 74-year-old guy from very much, who says he's a socialist and promising to raise taxes, doesn't that show that there's a piece of passion missing that's necessary for her?
Well, I think there certainly is an affinity for Sanders among millennials. You can hear that. And
Oh,
if you're
yes.
progressive, I mean, you know, Bernie's sort of like the environmentalist for the longest time. They were saying nobody was listening to him. And then finally was like, hey, you know, people are listening to me. And I think that's part of the Sanders phenomenon. And then millennials, you know, he certainly speaks to their passion, but then there's also, I guess, it would be a similar type of establishment thing. So she does have some work to do, I think, in terms of closing that gap.
Yeah.
But I do think, at least in terms of the black vote, you know, this is probably the most aggressive I've seen.
In fact, I want to get
across the
into
line.
that and what Bernie Sanders said this past week about why he believes African Americans should be supporting him. We'll take a quick break, and as we go to that break, Mara McDonald talking with Marco Rubio. She asked him about his immigration policy and whether he'd like to build a wall.
A wall's a part of it. That alone won't be enough. I mean, the wall's critical to funneling traffic on the border to key sectors that we can monitor. But you also need mandatory e-verify. You need an entry-exit tracking system. 40% of the people in this country illegally are overstaying visas. And we only log people in. We don't log them when they leave. So we don't even have a running tally of who's overstayed visas. So it's more complicated than just a wall. But yes, part of it is securing the southern border with Mexico.
Unite and work together if we're all going to get through this.
Sounds like socialism to me.
Democratic socialism.
What's the difference?
Huge difference.
Huge?
Huge.
Twins separated at birth, those two. That's beautiful stuff. Welcome back to our live edition of Primetime Flashpoint. Darcy, we've got the debate coming up in Flint.
Yes.
On the Democratic side this Sunday night. I think that Bernie Sanders has been trying to make an interesting appeal to African American voters. He talked with our Mara McDonald about this yesterday, that he's the one who's talking about the criminal justice system. He's the one talking about balancing the playing field between Wall Street and the rank and file workers and on and on. He thinks that he's got a lot to offer urban voters all over America. It's not quite breaking through.
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. You got to remember that the Black Lives Matter protesters interrupted him early on at his events, right? And so I think they kind of helped, you know, bring him along. But they both are seriously making plays for the black vote. You got Morgan Freeman narrating an ad for Hillary. You got Spike Lee endorsing Bernie. And so, yeah, and then you actually had a sort of Black Lives Matter ad come from Bernie. So I think, you know, look, Hillary Clinton also has a pretty rich history as it relates to civil rights and advocacy and all that. But there is going to be a challenge on both sides, no matter what they're doing right now. They've got to get that base, you know, all the way out. It's an anomalous thing that happened with Obama in terms of African Americans. So how do you get close to that? How do you capture that? How do you get those folks out there?
Yeah, Brian, I'm fascinated by the Sanders candidacy as I have been about Trump, and it's interesting. They are both from different sides. They're tapping into that same sort of vein.
If campaign finance is your thing, if Wall Street is the enemy, it's not a completely unreasonable position to be torn between the Republican outsider and the Democratic outsider.
Isn't that something? Nolan, I think you think the same. You've heard the same thing.
Well, yeah, and I mean, what people are looking for, the frustration voters are feeling. I mean, there's a lot of angry people out here, a lot of discontented people, and they're all angry about something different. But what they have in common is that they're discontented with the way the system works. A lot of people feel like they no longer have a voice in their government, that the power is all centralized in Washington and nobody's listening to them. Others are just fed up with the dysfunction, looking at America's position in the world and are concerned with the erosion of our influence. And people are mad about a lot of different things, and they're looking at the field of candidates and saying the same old formula is not going to solve it.
I still would be remiss if I didn't put a lot of that burden on the GOP. If you look at what happened in Michigan, when people in Flint were saying, look at this dirty water, when the Congress said from day one, we are going to impede everything that the
Or
president
Darcy,
does.
you could put it on a president and a Democratic Congress when they were in control who said, we're going to push through policies that we want, whether you like it or not, and who used their solid majority in the first 2 years to push through a health care plan that still has people.
Okay, so then we can go back to Lansing right now. I mean, we can go toe for toe on
You
this
look at a
one.
president who's used executive orders to bypass the representative process.
Well, how
who
about
has
a ballot proposal
consolidated,
that passes
who has
and
consolidated
that goes down
power.
and
I
implemented
think what we're
anyway.
seeing right here, this is why people are frustrated, right, on both sides. I mean, I think I disagree with Nolan a little bit. I think people are frustrated about the same things: income inequality, stagnant wages.
Sure.
You know, the United States' position in the world, but the prescriptions are completely different, right? So, you know, the Tea Party prescription is, you know, get government off our back. You know, the liberal prescription is we need more and bigger government. I mean, so the prescriptions are completely different. But I think the real reason why people, it's not that, yes, I mean, people are upset at the president for the way he's handled his job. People are upset with the way the Congress has handled their job. But at the end of the day, people just want government that works. And people aren't seeing government that works.
It's responsive.
Every time you have an interaction with a government agency or you see government on television, it is an example of government not working. And that is what has kind of eroded the confidence, because no one has been allowed to really manage government. As someone who managed, ran 2 federal agencies, I can tell you the ability to run a federal agency is the most difficult thing in the world, because you cannot make change.
And Flint has become the poster for much of the country
Failure
on
of
exactly
government
your
at
point.
every level.
I'm curious as to how we think that all of this is also obviously not only a presidential year. There will be a lot of things on your ballot as we get to November. Brian, how's any congressional races that you think are particularly interesting, or is the real story going to be how this presidential race ends up playing out and how that affects congressional races?
Well, I think both. I think the 1st and the 7th, just off the top of my head, are interesting in any context. And if Donald Trump heads the Republican ticket, they're really interesting. But as Nolan was saying earlier, if Trump heads the Republican ticket, a lot of the big Republican money is going to flow into those races in an attempt to at least hold the congressional majority, the Republican congressional majority, no matter what happens at the presidential level.
And you also have to look at the state level. I mean, this is 6 years after 2010, when Republicans swept in and took everything. They took a lot of House seats in Michigan and a lot of congressional seats, some congressional seats in Michigan they otherwise wouldn't have gotten. Now we're 6 years later. Those 2010 representatives at the state level are term limited out. It's going to be hard for the Republicans to hold the House. I think it's going to be hard to hold that 1st district up north that was traditionally Democratic, and Republicans won it in 2010. I think you're going to see a lot of very competitive congressional races this time, and state house races.
Darcy, last thing I wanted to get to, and I've only got about 20 seconds left in the segment, but do you suppose that we're watching what we're going to remember as an outlier election, or have we reached a new normal?
Oh, that's a scary thought. I hope it's not the new normal. But, I mean, it's certainly one of a kind. I mean, you know, I think because it's so hyperbolic, it will reach a tipping point. I think that, people will tire. People tire of the extreme. And I think we're going to get to a point where it's just too much extreme.
Tell you what, let's turn this over to our pollster and see what he expects is going to happen. When we come back, a conversation with Richard Zuba, what the voters are telling him about Tuesday's primary. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Thank you very much for being here. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you like my boots?
I do. Can I keep them? I need a backup pair.
Yes, Marco Rubio's boots, just one more extraordinary moment in an extraordinary campaign. You've heard a lot over this hour, but of course voters are going to get the final word next Tuesday, and that's why I thought we would wrap up this hour talking with a guy who has been listening to voters quite a bit, and that's our pollster here at Local 4 and for the Detroit News, Richard Zuba of the Glenn Gariff Group, who joins us now. Richard, I guess off the top I'll let you join your voice to the chorus of "I've never seen anything like this campaign before."
Well, I think we're now moving into uncharted territory. We've got a previous nominee who's saying the future nominee is disqualified. I think what we're seeing here is, truly historic. And it may be that the Republican Party is going to have a very hard time coming back together post-Cleveland.
Yeah, in fact, when Mitt Romney came out after going out after Donald Trump this past week, it sent you scurrying for precedent, and you really couldn't find any, could you?
Well, the last I could find was Dewey refusing to go to the 1964 Goldwater Convention. That is really how unprecedented and historic that moment was, that Romney came out and essentially said Donald Trump was disqualified from being the president.
Well, our most recent poll, here, let's take a look at these numbers. We had Donald Trump still with a healthy lead at the time. However, the interesting thing here is, and this was from 2 weeks ago, so we still had Ben Carson, and in fact, Jeb Bush was still being figured into the numbers. So, Richard, if you add Ben Carson, Jeb Bush, and the undecideds, that adds up to 35% of the vote still being in play, or is it still in play? Where do you think all that's going?
You know, well, in our surveying, one of the things we did was we asked specifically, who was your second choice? And we also asked, how committed are you to your first choice? And very interestingly, Donald Trump's voters, 64% said they were definitely voting for Trump. When you look at Cruz and Rubio, that number fell to the mid-40s. So the Trump voters are voting, and they're voting for their candidate. But I think where the undecideds are coming in are they're not sure where to go in terms of an establishment candidate or the other options, and they're sorting those options out.
Well, in fact, when you ask people about your priorities, let me take a look at this next page that we have here, because I think this goes right into what you were saying. This is really fascinating. You start looking at all these reasons that people support, the most important issue for them supporting their candidate. Look at the very bottom. Can win in November. Electability, only about 6% of the voters seem to be worrying about that part right now.
And you know, Republican primary voters have a very good habit of picking the most electable candidate in a general election. What they're saying this year is they're throwing that out the window. They want a candidate that reflects their values and their thoughts.
Well, then, if we, and the theme of the night has been anger and frustration that we've seen from voters in light of Trump and Cruz and Sanders. You put them all together, that they may be going in different directions, but coming out of the same well of frustration.
You know, a lot of people have said we haven't seen this block of voters in the Republican Party, and I would contend we actually have, and it was in the 1992 Pat Buchanan voters, where he challenged George Sr. for the nomination, George Bush Sr. And the difference then was we had a one-on-one race, and everybody kind of coalesced behind George Bush Sr. while Pat Buchanan took about a third of the vote. Well, that third of the vote is still there, but the difference is now we have the opposition splintering into a number of candidates.
Well, lastly, Richard, for those of us who follow politics, whether you're a journalist, a pollster, an analyst, a consultant, the golden unicorn of politics is a contested convention, a brokered convention. How likely do you think that that's what we're headed toward this summer?
Well, I think the next several weeks, and I think particularly March 15th is going to really signal if that's a possibility. If Governor Kasich wins Ohio, I think the likelihood of a contested convention is going to be far greater, because he's going to walk into the Cleveland convention with a good fistful of delegates. And that may be enough to prevent Donald Trump from getting that 50% that he's going to need to have an outright nomination. And then all bets are off, because we don't know what's going to happen.
So much drama ahead. Richard, thanks very much for your time. Always good to talk to you, and I know we'll talk to you again very soon. And thanks to all of my guests for being here tonight. Most of all, thank you. Sunday morning on Flashpoint at 10 a.m., I'll be joined for a conversation with former Judge Stephen Rhodes. He oversaw the Detroit bankruptcy. Now he's going to oversee Detroit schools. I hope you'll join us for that. We'll see you later on tonight for Local 4 News at 11. For everybody here at Local 4, I'm Devin Skillion. Thanks for watching Primetime Flashpoint.